Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Parkinson's Podcast. Welcome to the Hear, Hear Parkinson's Podcast, where you will hear from special guests covering the world of Parkinson's with a deep dive on the World Parkinson Congress and a look at how the WPC has helped make extraordinary progress in the Parkinson's community by creating space for people with Parkinson's to have a seat at the table.
Okay, this is my pleasure to be the host today of the Hear Hear podcast. This is a podcast designed by and for the World Parkinson Coalition, and my name is Eli Pollard. I am filling in. I'm not normally the host of this podcast program, but our normal host is out at this current time, so I'm filling in as host. And instead of being the co-host and the sidekick, I'm bringing in my own co-host and sidekick, Julia Obergasteiger, if I said that correctly, our amazing science ambassador who is currently based up in Quebec City. And Julia, say hi.
Hello. Yes, pronounced perfectly. Thank you so much. My name is Julia. I'm currently a postdoc, and more importantly, I'm one of the science ambassadors for the WPC next year.
Welcome. We're super excited for this guest that we have today. I've had the pleasure of working with him for many, many years, and Julia just had the chance to meet him, but we found out there's actually a little connection and lineage here. Our guest is Dr. Jon Stoessl, who is dialing in today from Vancouver. He also is the former president of the World Parkinson Coalition, so he knows quite a bit about the WPC. Hi, Jon.
Hello, how are you?
We're good. The question is, how are you? What are you up to, Jon? Jon, you know, when you left the WPC years ago, you told me you were retiring, and I don't think you did. You know, what's going on? What are you up to?
No, I'm working towards it, inching my way towards it. So I'm still seeing patients at a reduced rate, and stopped accepting new patients several years ago in an effort to kind of make it a gradual, with minimal impact on both patients and my colleagues. I still have some research projects going on at a reduced rate compared to the past. And probably the big thing these days is I'm the editor-in-chief of Movement Disorders, which is pretty much a full-time job, in fact.
I was going to say, what is your tenure? When does that wrap up?
So that's not official yet. I have indicated I did a 5-year term as deputy editor and a 5-year term as editor-in-chief. I'm in my second term now, which is technically a 5-year term, but I've indicated that I should step aside. And so I would plan to do that at the end of 2026. And I anticipate that, although it is not yet out, I anticipate that there will be a call put out in the next short while for people to apply, because there's a long process for the society to select a new editor.
Yeah. So I think that as an editor, you're in this incredible position. You've always, obviously, because of who you are and the role you play in the Parkinson's space, you're always keeping your eye on what's going on in the landscape around Parkinson's research. But because you're editing the journal, you really know kind of what's happening and the exciting things on the horizon. Is there anything that you're really excited about in the space? Like, what's going on? Can you give us?
I have to take out my notebook now.
Yeah, Julie's taking notes now.
No, it's really different variations on things that are very familiar. I mean, obviously, looking at causes and mechanisms that contribute to Parkinson's disease. As you well know, there's been a lot of interest in biomarkers and biological definitions / classifications / staging of Parkinson's, with some disparity of opinion amongst the profession, and also I think very related to WPC, actually, the ethical implications of making a diagnosis based on a lab test, a concept with which many of us feel somewhat uncomfortable. And I think this is highly relevant to WPC because, as we know, in fact, there's a slide I show, which when I talk about this, and it's made up, the last slide is actually pictures of people, all of whom I know or knew through WPC. And to make the point that just because you know somebody's diagnosis doesn't mean that you know anything about them or what they can accomplish. Needless to say, I'm showing people who've accomplished a lot without their permission, by the way. I just grabbed their photos off the web. So I won't say who they are, but you can probably imagine. So that's been a very big area. And then the other area is not one where I have expertise, but it's extremely active, is electrophysiology and neuromodulation. There's a lot happening there, and it's actually hard to stay on top of it unless you're a real expert.
Yeah. Julia, go ahead. I know you have questions.
Yeah, I was wondering because you were talking about biomarkers. So I have the feeling in the field, right, there is a few of them and different ones that are actually, like kind of like coming up and are really being discussed. And if you have a feeling about, is it going to be a combination of different ones? Is it, as you say, kind of not something that is replacing anything, but rather, contributing maybe to what we already have in the clinics?
That's a really good point. So when you say not replacing, I presume you're referring to not replacing clinical assessment, which in my view is still critical to all of this. Yeah, I mean, obviously the huge change, the game changer here has been the seeding amplification assays, which look to be pretty good. Again, not my expertise. There are some issues. There are technical issues related to this. So right now, one of the most reliable, if not the most reliable SAA comes from essentially a private company. So there are going to be interesting issues about how you generalize, make this generalizable, and dependence on a single company. Obviously that's not optimal in the long run. The point has also been made, and I don't want to beat it to death, but we're talking about tests that are expensive and may only be accessible to people who live in the top percentage of the first world. And there are still many parts of the world where people can't get adequate access to levodopa.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big deal.
And then to try to return to your question a little bit more, I think it also depends on what the purpose is for the biomarker. We want, you may need a biomarker for diagnosis. You may want biomarkers for assessing progression or the effects of disease-modifying intervention. We're nowhere near that as far as I'm concerned. And then you might want biomarkers to predict certain complications. And again, I don't think we're near that.
I'm just curious, Jon, are you actually having patients ask you? I mean, you have your patient load is decreasing, but are people actually asking you for any of this, or is it really just, are you hearing directly from patients? That's my question.
Occasionally people ask, but there have been interesting things. So we're still bringing people in from elsewhere for research studies, and sometimes these people have essentially been sent a diagnosis by postcard because you can go and basically get a test. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there are people who may not have anything wrong with them who can basically get some kind of a biomarker test, whether it's genetic or whether it's seeding amplification or immunohistochemistry on the skin. They can get a diagnosis when they have no symptoms.
which is terrifying, because that's not what you're.
It is. It is a little bit. I mean, I think, the counterbalance to this is that people have rights. They have a right to know.
Yeah.
But how the information is delivered is extremely important, and I'm not sure that adequate attention has been paid to that.
Yeah. Yeah. What would be, so thinking from a WPC perspective, obviously we're always about, including all voices within the community, and particularly thinking about people with Parkinson's. If somebody with Parkinson's asked you, or like, should I get this, let's say a family member of somebody with Parkinson's came to you and said, I think I want to do this test, whatever that test is. There are other ones out there, or those out there. I want to do this test to see if I carry the potential to have Parkinson's. I'm not going to do the genetic testing. I just want to do this test and see if I might have this. What would be your suggestion and sort of questions they should ask and things they could take into consideration before they do that? If they're going to do it anyway, what would be your tip for them before they do it?
You're talking about seeding amplification assay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a highly theoretical question where I am, because I don't think it would be available to most people where I'm practicing.
What about skin test? Like if someone comes to you and says, I can do this skin test that'll tell me if I have a potential possibility for this. It's not 100%.
Yeah, I again think that would not be so readily available where I am. But I guess I would want to know why they would want to know. And if they don't have symptoms, I'm not sure what the utility would be. I mean, if they had a family history, the usual discussion, to be honest, is around genetic testing, which is also not readily accessible where we are. And more importantly, what's even less accessible is genetic counseling. So there have been studies done looking at this. A lot of neurologists end up doing the genetic counseling. And I've had some disagreement with knowledgeable colleagues about this. One who's a neurogeneticist feels very strongly that that neurologists should be able to do this, but that's because she's an expert. I would say that it's actually quite nuanced sometimes. There are various pathogenic variants that may not be fully expressed. There are nuances in the interpretation of the genetic testing. So I actually think it requires somebody with a fair bit of expertise, and genetic counselors, unfortunately, don't grow on trees. There is the Parkinson Foundation has addressed this to a very helpful extent with PD generation, where the testing is linked to counseling. It's a bit complicated across borders and for people who are not, associated with the Parkinson Foundation, but I think that is the right idea. And for the future, ethically, I think we're going to require, I think every major medical center will need to, or clinic will require genetic counseling as part of a standard of care. And analogously, I think the same will be required for the interpretation of these tests. There are false positives and false negatives, even with the seeding amplification assay. So this is not for the casual observer to be trying to run it.
Yeah. I mean, the idea, Jon, that every person when they get a Parkinson's diagnosis would then be recommended to go on and get genetic testing, that just honestly blows my mind, because even in just the 20 years I've been in my position at the WPC, and 21 years ago, people were like, genetics, it doesn't matter for Parkinson's. There's not really much genetics to look at here. The fact that we're now in a place where, like, you think that's potentially on the horizon, I think that's incredible. I mean,
well, I don't think that everybody would necessarily be advised to do it, but I think that if people want access to it, or there's a reason to do it, that it needs to be combined with appropriate expertise in interpretation.
Yeah.
But to come back to my point is, why would you want to know?
Yeah.
And do you think that you can predict an individual's future based on a couple of lab tests? And I would say no. I've seen thousands of people with Parkinson's over my career, and there are no two who are exactly alike.
No.
There are the extremes. There are the people that you can tell will do well for some time, and people that are likely to do poorly. But you just look at all the people who participate in WPC, and you can see their extraordinary capacity.
Yeah. Speaking of WPC, that story, I mean, you guys, I think, have both seen Jimmy Choi, who's like, the ninja warrior, right? His story, I always reflect on it because when he was diagnosed, he was not in good shape. He was unhealthy. He was not taking care of himself. And now he's out, on this ninja warrior. So there is a path forward for people. Not that everyone's going to become a ninja warrior and like Jimmy Choi, but I think you're very right. You're very right, Jon.
Well, I think it also brings up the point that people who are engaged, so people can't be blamed for being ill or if they're not doing well. But on the other hand, attitude and engagement have a lot to do with success. And so people who do become engaged, who want to know more about their disease, and who participate in things that may help make them better, like exercise and wellness programs, they are more likely to do well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. Like when you say, like, if in a perfect world, like people would have access to various type of tests and they could do them, and maybe it might not predict their future, but it might just help them to kind of change their lifestyle a little bit to kind of a little bit more healthy, little bit more exercise, which we know is really important. So in that view, it would be great, but obviously it's
Well, you could argue that we should be counseling everybody, including ourselves, to exercise and to have a healthy lifestyle. But the fact is, your level of motivation is going to be higher if you know that there's something driving it.
Yeah, we all know, but sometimes probably just knowing is not enough. For some people, you might need this piece of paper that says something on black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jon, WPC, you've been around for a long time. You attended the first WPC, and that's a good thing. We're glad you did for a long time. You attended the first World Parkinson Congress in 2006 in Washington, D.C. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your sort of WPC journey. You were there in 2006. You were not there in 2010 in Glasgow, but then you came back on the scene in 2013. What was your sort of, when you reflect back on that, what was your WPC journey?
So 2006 was, of course, the first WPC. That was probably a challenging experience for many people. I was actually invited to give a talk on placebo effects, and we'd had a fairly high-profile paper on mechanism of placebo effect in Parkinson's a few years earlier. And I was kind of expecting that nobody would be interested in this and that it would be an empty room. So it was standing room only because it happened to come at a time when a high-tech therapy was being developed and then withdrawn from further use at the time. It's back again. But the double-blind study, the initial double-blind study, didn't show any benefit, and there had been some concerns about toxicity, which turned out to be incorrect. So many of the people who were in the room were upset that this therapy had been withdrawn. And what I remember best is that at the end, when I was taking questions, there was a question that started out sounding very benign, and I rapidly realized that it was an attack related to the withdrawal of this therapy. Also in the room were the people who were leading the trial. We had done the imaging for the trial, but I wasn't otherwise involved. And I could see them sinking lower and lower into their chairs. And yeah, as Eli knows, I have these last minute impulses that can't always be suppressed. And I did wonder whether I should call upon them to answer the question, but decided to be nice and not do that. I only say this because I think at the first meeting, it was a brand new concept for the Parkinson world to have basic scientists, clinicians, patients, and their families all together in the same room. And there was some difficulty with people finding a comfortable way to make that work. Mm-hmm. Some people will probably never feel comfortable in that situation, but I think a couple of things happened. One was the incredible influence of Tom Isaacs and people who like-minded people who basically went out to the Parkinson community and said, look, if you want this to work, we're going to have to engage in a more constructive fashion. And then I think by a natural process of selection and attrition, the people who felt committed to this concept were the ones who stayed behind. So I wasn't there in 2010. I actually had a previous commitment at that point, but it was right around the time of that meeting that Eli and Stan Fawn, who founded the WPC, approached me about co-chairing the steering committee for Montreal. I didn't realize that the 2013 meeting was going to be held in Montreal. And they were looking for a Canadian to co-chair. So I initially couldn't believe that they'd approached me about it and just kind of ignored it. And then
Stan is persistent, Jon. Stan doesn't go away when he has an idea.
I kind of noticed. So Stan contacted me more than once, and Stan's not a person to whom one can easily say no. Not only because a powerful figure in the field, but also because he's literally one of the founding fathers of the movement disorders field, and so he's highly respected by everybody. So eventually, I agreed to do it with a lot of trepidation, and then it was an absolutely electrifying experience. And I think perhaps because I was so heavily involved in the organization of it, it felt different to me from the way it might to the average participant. But I literally felt that I was walking 3 feet off the ground the entire week of the meeting. There was a buzz in the convention center. People were excited about it. And so at that point, I hadn't only tasted the Kool-Aid, I'd kind of drunk several liters of it. And one of the other really magical aspects of the meeting was watching basic science trainees and patients interact. You could kind of see that they were approaching each other with a little bit of hesitation, not sure whether they should go ahead or not. And then the little smiles come out on the face. And then when they actually collide, it's just magical because they were thrilled on both sides. And that's still very true about the meeting and is probably unique.
Yeah. I can totally agree with that, because this was actually my first experience of the WPC. My first meeting was in Kyoto, and it was the first time that I had a person living with Parkinson's coming to my poster and ask me about what I'm doing and what my work is, and that was awesome. It was great. But yeah, I can relate to that 100%.
Yeah, it's a very special thing, and then each meeting has its own unique things. I won't go through all of them, but well, Montreal opened with somebody who had just won the amazing race with his son, and so he was a surprise speaker at the opening ceremonies, as were there was a children's choir from Mount Royal who sang an arrangement of the Samuel Barber Adagio for strings. So I was supposed to be emceeing, and I was sitting in the front row, bawling my eyes out. It was so beautiful. Um, and a lot of very moving stories. In Kyoto, which is, of course, a magical city in its own right, there was a rock star who came out, basically. And Japanese culture is a bit different. And I think a lot of people with Parkinson's had, up until that time, seen it as something they would want to hide from others. And so seeing this guy come out in public was a phenomenally liberating experience. And just watching, you could see literally over the course of a day or two, you could see people taking on a greater, I want to say aggression, the wrong word is failing me right now, but they were basically being much more assertive. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is that over time, as people find their way in the meeting, the scientific not really expertise, but sophistication of the people with Parkinson's is something to behold. So I would say at the last meeting in Barcelona, I don't want to offend too many people, but the questions that came from the patients at the plenary sessions were actually the most sophisticated questions.
Incredible.
And in some cases, more sophisticated than the answers they got.
I love that, Jon. That actually reminds me when we were in Kyoto, which I agree with you, totally magical city. That was when we had Professor Shinya Yamanaka speaking about iPS cells, and he was a Nobel Prize winner. This was a big deal. He's so young, this young man doing this incredible research. Young, I mean, he was so young. I couldn't believe how young he was when I met him. I was like, how did you win a Nobel Prize? But I do remember that when he spoke, the first person who stood up with a question was a person with Parkinson's. And I just remember, and I was like, oh, please be a good question. Make it a good one. And man, that question that she came out with, it was incredible. And even he paused and he's like, wow, that's a really interesting question. And I remember thinking, yes, that sends the right message, right? And he really just, the conversation was amazing. I don't know if I ever told you this afterward, Jon, but his staff, Professor Yamanaka's staff, contacted me afterward and said, we would like to run a meeting like the WPC in Japan, but we don't know how you did it. How do you do it? Tell us everything so we can do it in Japan.
Well, I think he was extremely moved. I mean, I met him for the first and only time at that session. Everybody was completely blown away, not only by his scientific accomplishments, but by his humility. My wife, who has nothing to do with science, was in the room and was totally moved by him. And then speaking with him afterwards, I realized what a genuinely and profoundly moving experience it was for him. And that's one of the interesting aspects about WPC is that it's a much more popular meeting with basic scientists than a number of the other Parkinson type meetings that go on. I think because of that interaction. So it's not just that the meeting is reaching out to patients and making patients feel included. It's really that it serves to synthesize new ways of looking at things.
Hear, hear. I absolutely agree with that. I don't think, when we started this, and I know we're sort of coming sort of to the end of our podcast time, but it's so great hearing you talk about this, Jon, because I haven't talked to you in a while, and we've never had time to for me to just sort of have you talk about the WPC, but it has been such an incredible evolution since 2006 to watch this happen. And we've made these sometimes big adjustments, but sort of small adjustments through each Congress. And we've gotten just a little bit better each time. And I still hear these stories being people like Julia and her entire cohort of our science ambassadors, all when they were all interviewed for their position, they all have such incredibly moving stories about how the WPC changed their trajectory of how they think about their research, how they talk about their research, what they want to research. I don't think in the beginning we didn't quite know what we were doing. We really were just trying something totally new. I honestly, I never even thought we'd be here 20 years later. I was naive enough to think there might be a cure before this point in time, but the fact that we're still here and these relationships are still happening and these unique sort of magical exchanges happen, it's what makes the work really worth it. So.
Yeah, and it's a great community. I mean, there are a lot of people who are very committed to WPC. Certainly in my world there are, and those people, it's always a pleasure to interact with them.
Amazing. All right. Well, I'm gonna start to roll out. We have a couple of questions for you, Jon, as we wrap up this podcast. And these are Edgar's legacy questions. Edgar, our normal podcast host. So, Jon, I kind of thinking I know what you might even say on this one, but Jon, you're trapped on a desert island, but magically there is a record player that is solar powered, so you can actually play a record. But you're gonna have to listen to that for a long time. What would you play? What would you take with you to that desert island? Your one record or one song, whatever?
That's actually tough. I love classical music. I'm not sure if this would be a tough call for me. It would be Mozart, Bach, Schubert, or Beethoven. But I don't like greatest hits type recordings, so that could be a tough one. There are many things to which I would want to listen.
I had a feeling that was the direction your answer was going to go, but that's good. It's good to know. Then last question we're going to end with here is, you're trapped in an elevator for a short period of time. Who do you take in the elevator with you? Space-time continuum is of no consequence. Alive, dead, young, old, wherever, whomever. Who do you take in the elevator with you?
Oh my God.
And why? Well, really, who do you want in the elevator with you?
These days, I'm not sure if I could give you names. These days, I think I would probably want to take either an author or a political commentator. Or historian. I mean, there's so much happening in the world that would be the interesting conversation to better understand motivations for certain behaviors or misbehaviors, and what trajectory the person has, looking from their expertise. But to give you a name, I'm not sure I would be able or want to do that right on the spot.
Okay. Historian, author, someone who can help process some of the, I was going to say craziness, but some of the things happening in the world right now. I get that. That's excellent. All right. Very good. So that really concludes our podcast for the day. I want to thank Julia for joining us. And I don't think we actually said on the podcast, but there's a little lineage here. Is that Julia?
Yeah, no, you mentioned it with Mattia.
Yeah, so
or did you not?
You're training with
Mattia
Volta, and Mattia Volta did his training at UBC with Jon's colleague and team. And I didn't even know when we pulled this team together that, Jon, you're like the grandpa.
I did not say that though.
Lineage, I can say that. It's the family lineage.
I'm not dead yet.
You'll be a great grandpa, Jon. You'll be a great grandpa.
It is a really nice circle though. Yes.
Love it.
Coming back.
All right. Well, with that, we'll end the podcast and just thank everybody for joining and listening. And Jon, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a great opportunity to.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me. And Julia, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks. It was great.
Thank you for joining the Here Parkinson's podcast. If you would like to experience the next World Parkinson Congress for yourself, to feel and see the change in real time, save the date to join us from May 24th to the 27th, 2026 in Phoenix, Arizona. Learn more at WPC2026.org. This podcast series is made possible with support from Blue Rock Therapeutics.